Not For Nothin, name of the podcast.
I think we're set, fellas.
Yeah.
I think you can roll whenever you're ready.
Are we rolling?
We're rolling all the way around.
Rolling. Oh, all right.
Audio's on.
Good stuff. Hello, my friend.
Hello.
You look attractive. I'm sorry, I've been thinking all day of saying it to make it awkward, like right out the gate.
I'm perfectly comfortable with my sexuality, so it's fine.
Welcome. I wanted to look at the camera. You know what? Fuck.
Welcome to the Not For Nothin podcast. Our first guest is, and if you would, introduce yourself, tell me a little about you.
My name's Keoni Koch, 44, going to be turning 45 in May.
May what?
May 24th. Wow, where do I start? How far back do you want me to go?
So I was born.
So I was born in Cedar Rapids, Iowa.
I mean, I guess just, if you were to introduce yourself to somebody new today and they asked me, so tell me about yourself, what would you say?
I'd say I'm a father of two, dedicated husband. I'm self-taught martial artist for the most part until recently when I've been able to kind of work with higher level martial artists more intimately, so to speak. I was an insecure kid, very shy, socially withdrawn, which a lot of people probably wouldn't believe, but grew up in kind of a poor house. That came with a lot of rage, came with a lot of anger because I wanted to be, humans are a social creature, you know what I mean? And they want that interaction. And I was blessed to have a great family, a very loving family and a stable home, which is what I attribute any success that I have would be to my parents. The social awkwardness that I dealt with as a child kind of developed a lot of rage and anger inside of me towards the world, and luckily I found martial arts at the appropriate time as an adolescent, and subsequently then mixed martial arts. When the UFC came out in 1994, I was already studying martial arts and already studying Bruce Lee, actually, reading Bruce Lee's books and things like that. And
See, I didn't know that. I thought,
really?
I had always thought the UFC was kind of the genesis for you. Was like you watching the UFC and being like, damn, that's cool. That wasn't, huh?
No, actually, so what happened was, this goes back probably to when I was, 11 or 12, something like that, maybe even younger. My dad and I were on our way back from Lamont, where my grandparents lived, and this was during a time when all I had really was my family. I didn't have a lot of friends. My family moved almost every year on the year. Because they just, the 80s, there was a recession time in the 80s, and my dad got laid off, and my parents were struggling from year to year. So we were moving to a new location like every year. So what happened was I would make some friends, and it would take me a long time to make friends because I was very shy, and then right when I would make these friends, they'd bounce, and I'd lose these friends. And then eventually I just stopped trying to make friends, but I also felt, my parents were also bodybuilders. They were lifters. My mom was a serious amateur. She was Miss Iowa 1984 in bodybuilding, actually. And so I grew up in a gym. I grew up in a gym called Raw Power that my mom helped manage and teach at.
It's a great name.
Yeah, and I was surrounded by huge, strong people. And I was not huge, and I was not strong, and I was not even really genetically blessed, but my idea of power came from seeing all of these powerful people around me. I attributed size to power, and
like most kids?
Like most people, yeah.
Yeah.
In Western culture, I think, size matters to most people, so I didn't feel that at all. I felt really powerless because I was really shy and socially withdrawn. I was like, I wouldn't even go to like birthday parties and stuff because I was worried about like being socially ostracized or bullied or anything like that. So anyways, we're on our way back from my grandparents' place in the country, which we went to every week without fail. And my dad started talking, I don't know what the conversation was, but it was something essentially that I was alluding to, that strength and size was the most important thing. We used to watch pro wrestling and stuff like that. And he's like, oh no, there's, you know, size doesn't always matter. There's this little Chinese guy named Bruce Lee who moves faster than anybody I've ever seen. And I thought he was just kind of like, you know, messing with me. And he took me back to Cedar Rapids, and that night rented Enter the Dragon. And so I watched Enter the Dragon, and there's a scene that I've talked about in the past that really changed my life. It was a fork in the road for me. And it was when Bruce Lee and Bob Wall squared off and went forearm to forearm. And Bruce moved so quickly that the camera couldn't really track his speed. It looked instantaneous, but you could tell it wasn't a camera trick. You could tell that this guy was just that fast. And I was like, in that moment, I was like, wow, like there is a way for small people. There's a way for people that don't have hulking strength to move and to overcome some of these issues. And I was just inspired. And so I started reading Bruce Lee's books. The most commonly available one at the time, the easiest one to find, was the Tao of Jeet Kune Do, which was his, you know, his biggest book. And I was like, once I learned about that book, I'm like, I'm gonna get this book, I'm gonna study this book, I'm gonna be like Bruce Lee, I'm gonna know all of his moves, and I'm gonna be the ultimate badass, you know what I mean?
And this was the 80s, so obviously we all thought karate.
Right, karate,
was
taekwondo, kung fu. There was
Yep.
this idea of martial arts as this mystical Eastern thing, and it was. I mean, some of it is, but it gave me hope that a small statured person could be functional and could defend themselves. And at the time, like, a lot of this insecurity that I had was ultimately in a lack of confidence that I had of my ability to interact with other people or even fend off bullying. And so I was kind of disheartened when I read the book first, because I'm like, you know, like I said, I'm under the age of like 12, 13. And this book it does have techniques in it. It has scribblings that Bruce made of different techniques, which interestingly now, you know, when you go back and look at it, there's quite a bit of grappling in there. And grappling at the time was not seen as like the dominant martial art form. And so the reason I was kind of disappointed, because it wasn't a manual on how to become a total badass, it was a philosophy book. A lot of it was philosophical, and it had dealt with what Bruce had dealt with, you know, growing up in martial arts his whole life. And Bruce had this theory, this theory that kind of founded the Jeet Kune Do idea, that is, you take what works, you keep it, you use it to allow yourself to express your own individual martial arts way, and then you cast everything else that's useless, forms, stuff like that, out the door. Katas, yeah. And I had to read through it a couple times. I was like, I knew that this was an important book, so I went through it again. And again, I'm very young, and I highlight the things that stick out to me the most, the philosophy and also the techniques. And I started training. And I started not being interested in what most people were interested, which was find a martial art, do it, become a black belt, and now all of a sudden you're an indestructible fighting machine. That was kind of the consensus. And there was a lot of delusion that I felt like. My parents were very religious people, and I was a very rebellious spirit, you know, because I felt like the world was wrong, probably because of my own inner anger. And I saw people adhering to martial arts in a very cult-like fashion, you know, going to Taekwondo and hearing martial artists say things like, well, I have a black belt in Taekwondo, and if somebody tried to take me down or if somebody tried to wrestle me, I could just do this and do that. And I'm like, that doesn't seem logical to me. Like, you don't have any experience in wrestling, or you don't have any experience in boxing, so how could you say absolutely that you could take on this other type of martial art? It didn't make sense. Bruce's theory made sense to me, that you studied everything to be the most well-rounded person you could be in a skill or a trade. This was before mixed martial arts. It was, and this is why I think a lot of the people that in the know attribute Bruce to being the forefather of modern mixed martial arts, because his theory predates the UFC by decades. And it was also highly controversial. You know, when I would talk to my brother, for example, was doing Taekwondo at a local dojo shortly after this time, and I talked to his instructor, you know, like, would you ever consider having grapplers come in and cross-train? And he was like, oh no, I could show you some things. And I have some videos, I have some VHS cassettes, VHS, throwback. to show you how to shut this stuff down. And none of that resonated with me. To me, Bruce was the philosophy that Bruce had, the mixing of styles made the most sense. So I started going into the back of Black Belt magazine and trying to order some of these things as I could. I would ask for videos for like birthdays and Christmas and stuff like that, because we could hardly afford anything. And a lot of these things were fairly expensive. So I was trying to study like ninjutsu, you know what I mean? I was trying to study the cool shit and put it all together and become what Bruce said. And I really did adhere to the philosophy, because a lot of people, there was this weird divide in Jeet Kune Do in the early days where Bruce implicitly says, my specific style of Gung Fu and the things that I've studied is what my expression is, but it's not going to be what you study. This is not a martial art, it's philosophy. Well, half of the people ran with that, and half of the people went, no, I'm going to study exactly what Bruce did. And I'm like, you missed the whole point. But I was studying all of these different martial arts. I had this whole collection, Bruce's books included, but all of this kind of random, obscure martial arts stuff, because I was like, I'm going to go find the hidden knowledge of the world of martial arts, and I'm going to make my own style. And then, you know, growing up, being a martial arts fan already and studying some of this stuff on my own, I was watching, you know, like Steven Seagal movies and Jean-Claude Van Damme. And one of the main plot lines of maybe a third of Van Damme's movies are the super tournament, blood sport, kickboxer, where they bring in all of these different styles to determine who's the king. And I was like, man, I wish that would happen in real life. You know, I wish that would actually happen. They've made it so many movies. Why doesn't somebody actually do something like that? So pivotal moment number 2 for martial arts for me was going through a Blockbuster video in the special interest section and seeing this thing that I thought was a movie that was misplaced. It was like big guy on the front holding up the world. A tournament, no holds barred. And I'm like, what's this? Turn it around and I read it and I'm like, what is this movie? I've never seen this before. And then it dawns on me that this is an actual thing.
So this was obviously after the actual after UFC 1?
Yes.
No kidding.
So this was 6 to 12 months, I think, after, or something close to that. And so I was just mesmerized by this. I took this home and I watched what we would come to know as the first UFC, and it was brutal and shocking. And it was shocking primarily in that this skinny, kind of minuscule Brazilian guy just chewed through everybody. Just
not what we and our culture would picture. You know, it didn't look like Schwarzenegger, didn't look like Superfly Snuka, didn't look like, you know what I'm saying?
Didn't look like Arnold. Yeah. It didn't look like Commando. And so I was like, I had not closed my mind to grappling, but I had no idea that grappling was so effective until I saw Royce. And then I was like, I need to study that.
No kidding.
Yeah. And so that really began my journey into trying to find everything that I could out about Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. So this would have been 94, I think, 1994. And things were scarce. By that time, Jiu-Jitsu had arrived on the East and the West Coast, but nothing in the Midwest at that time. So I was relegated to trying to find, after Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu made it into Black Belt magazine and some of these things, trying to find some of this material, and it was hard to find. And the early internet was available at that point in time. So I was going online and trying to find web pages, and you'd have like Bruce's book, hand scrolled or hand drawn illustrations of this is how the Gracies do the armbar. But I had to compile all of this information and study, and I had to find people that were willing to let me try it on them, which was not easy to do. Hey, can I practice strangling you in my parents' basement?
Do you mind if I break your arm?
Yeah. So,
hey, Jeremy, can you turn my mic? Can you turn this down just a little bit? Thank you.
And I'm cold, so I'm going to throw this guy.
Yeah.
I'm going to throw this guy on real quick.
It's funny, I almost sent you a message, like, we're in the basement. It's a
well,
little
I
chilly.
mean, I've been in here before, you know, but like I dressed for the occasion. Now I'm going to mess up my beautiful, lovely golden hair.
Well, and generally, when you're in here, we're
sweating and
for those that don't know, this is actually, we'll get a wide shot at some point.
Yeah.
A little bit more.
Check your microphone, make sure you didn't cover it up.
Okay.
All right, cool.
Good.
Yeah, for those that don't know, this is actually our basement, me and my wife, and it is completely matted out, walls and floor. This is not real. This is movie magic.
No.
But yeah, crazy.
So I studied. I went to the local public library and checked out all the books that I could. And at the time, there wasn't really
Thank you.
Brazilian Jiu Jitsu books, but there was some books that I could study and diversify my skill sets. And then I got, as time went by, more Brazilian Jiu Jitsu information became available, so I would get that, and I would find a couple friends in school that would kind of let me try some of this stuff and train with me, and got more and more consistent, but Bruce Lee was what changed my life. Like, when I think about a fork in the road between who I was then and who I am now, it was that drive with my dad in the truck, and when he told me about Bruce, and I went from an insecure kid that had no confidence to somebody that had hope that they could become something more powerful. And then the UFC came out, and it validated everything that I believed. A lot of the martial artists pre-UFC were delusional. They were very cult-like. It's like a religion, a bunch of little mini religions.
Mm-hmm.
And
very much. You can't question.
Yeah,
You can't,
and people, it's interesting because people have said the same about me and the same about our gym, that we're a cult. And cult's not necessarily a bad word. It's been kind of attached to, a negative connotation. But religion's a cult, Christianity's a cult, Islam's a cult. So, but it was not a positive cult. If you've ever seen The Foot Fist Way, the movie with Danny McBride, that was very close to the way like Taekwondo dojos and stuff were run in the 90s, 80s, even probably the 70s. It was delusional. It wasn't based in real combat. It was based in theater a lot.
So I'd like your opinion, because I have one. But why did karate persist for as long as it did? Why did that delusion stay salient for, literally decades? You know what I mean? Like, the Karate Kid exists for a reason. The original movie, the fact that people were able to suspend disbelief.
I think Karate Kid played a big role in it.
Oh, there was a massive explosion. Karate Kid was 84.
Yeah,
I'm pretty
but
sure.
there's like Kung Fu too. Like you think about like that same era of cinema. You had what's the movie? Oh my God, I can't even think of it.
Oh, there were a ton of like really bad dubbed over.
Yeah.
And
Bruce's movies inspired a lot of love for Kung Fu and martial arts too, but I don't know what it was. I don't know what it was. I think that people went into something and it made them feel powerful, and they spread that message, but there wasn't reality. There wasn't, it was making people believe that they were tying into some ancient Eastern warrior spirit. And I think it was empowering to people, but it was also delusional in that they had no idea about the reality of real violence. They were also untested.
And I think that's why.
Yeah.
The end part, the reality of real violence.
Yeah. Totally different than what most people think.
Karate and Taekwondo to a lesser degree, but still to a certain degree, they don't spar.
And when they do spar, they spar with a certain number of rules.
Yes, and an exorbitant number of rules.
Yeah.
And since I've become involved in this, one of the things, not for nothing, the other reason boxing's been around for 130 years or whatever it is.
Honestly, like thousands of years.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yep. But yeah, I think that the delusion around karate and taekwondo and some of the more traditional martial arts existed for so long because there was no sparring.
Yeah.
Or
it was really limited. Like taekwondo, you can't punch in the face. What? Like so you can't try to shut somebody off. Like in a real situation, because this is the thing for me. Martial arts was always about, ultimately, if somebody tries to impose themselves upon you and take your life, can you take theirs? Can you stop them? It's a battle to the death. Martial, warlike, art, simple.
Yeah, a tap is, a tap or a referee stepping in is literally, a symbolic death.
Correct.
It's, okay, if this were to progress beyond this point, I would either be grievously injured, you know, or I would be dead.
I would require you to be merciful to me.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's to your point, that's not what martial arts was. It was theater. It was dance. It was delusion to a certain degree in a lot of schools. Not every school, because there were some hardcore ones out there. And there was stuff like Kyokushin karate. There were people. There always have been people.
What was Liddell's background? I want to say it was that, right?
I think so. I think Hackelman, his trainer, is
Okay.
Kyokushin, but don't quote me on that.
Okay.
But that's a good point right there. There were some dogs. There always have been. For example, Mitsuyo Maeda, who was kind of the forefather of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, was one of Kano's original judo students, and he traveled the world kicking people's asses and throwing people all over the place. And he introduced the forefathers of Jiu-Jitsu, Carlos Gracie, Elio Gracie, to the Newaza, to the ground techniques of judo that they specialized because they were smaller guys. They couldn't always overpower people. But Maeda traveled the world teaching and shoot fighting long before this mixed martial arts thing ever came about. So like, I feel as if the top martial artists, the real like, you know, ground shakers of the industry, always have known the truth. Because even, you know, when I was studying in the very beginning, I went to my brother's Taekwondo teacher. I told you and asked him about it, and I think the Gracies are really arrogant. And I'm like, well, have you met the Gracies? Well, no, but I've heard they're really expensive. And I'm like, well, maybe there's a reason that they're expensive.
Yeah,
But
get what you pay for.
he gave me a video, a VHS video of Joe Louis, not the boxer, Joe Louis, karate guy, and Michael DePasquale Jr., an American Jiu-Jitsu guy. And they knew too. It was a self-defense video. They knew that there were different techniques and different martial arts and that you needed to study all of them because you didn't want to be one of these people that was deluded into thinking your style was the king. So I feel like the top of any art knows that there needs to be like an acceptance and an understanding of different ideas and an openness to those ideas. I think if you limit, it's not just martial arts. It could be painting. If you think that you've got the shit figured out, you're done. Your growth is done. You can never go to the greats and get knowledge from them because your mind's closed to them. You know, it's an arrogance, I feel like. And so, I feel like the top martial artists have always known this, but I think a lot of people have used martial arts to dupe people and into making themselves, to glorifying themselves, and to take advantage of people who look at you as a leader and go, wow, look at, you still have bullshit martial artist instructors.
Yeah, we have a name for that. It's the...
Bullshido or Bushido.
Ooh, that's good. I was
Or
thinking...
McDojo.
That's what I was
Right.
thinking, yeah.
Where these people convince otherwise logical and reasonable people to think that they're energy blasting them and hitting pressure points and killing them and just bullshit. And people go along with it because they want to feel accepted. They want to feel like they're connected to some higher truth, even if it's, completely implausible, illogical, whatever the case may be.
Well, funny, we're back to the religious aspect of it.
Yeah. So that's how I got involved, and then I started training really seriously about 18. About 18 is when I was starting to find training partners that were really consistent. I moved to Belle Plaine. There were some wrestlers there, some former wrestlers there that I was teaching some jiu-jitsu to. And at that point, I had already studied quite a bit of striking, but I didn't have as much experience as I wanted in sparring. I started finding sparring partners, and it was crazy, man. Like, at that time, and this would have been 1998, there was a very small contingent of very passionate martial artists that were keeping mixed martial arts alive. And the people that I were training with, there still wasn't a gym anywhere in our area. So we were training in my buddy's chicken coop, literally. Before that, we were training on gravel and grass. And people were like, what do you mean? I mean exactly what I say. We were training a lot. We were training 2 to 3 times a week in his living room, grappling, blood all over the carpet, like burns all over your knees and elbows. And this was a party house. This dude had parties like twice a week at his house. So we moved the ottoman one time to roll, and there was mold under it from beer that had spilled. It was disgusting. But we loved it, or at least I did. As much as I could train, I would train, and we did what we had to do. I'll never forget one time, the first time that I actually had a sparring partner, his name's Kurt Marble. This was his house that he was renting and destroying it subsequently. And we had this pair of Century, just pure dog shit boxing gloves.
I mean, they're not good new. No offense, Century, but
Right. Like,
Yeah.
they were trash. They were the kind you buy from, like, Walmart so that you can pretend that you're going to be a boxer for, like, a day and a half.
for like Halloween.
Yeah, and if a pro boxer put these gloves on and hit the bag for an hour, they'd be gone. They'd be destroyed. Well, we only had one pair. We were broke. We didn't have any money. So I was a southpaw. He was an orthodox. So he got the left hand, I got the right, and we just jabbed the shit out of each other for our sparring rounds. We did this in a kitchen that had this huge patch of duct tape in one of the corners. And I'm like, Kurt, what the fuck is that? Like, you got a problem? He's like, yeah, just don't go over there. He's like, don't spar over there. The floor is not great there. It kind of rotted out. So we're getting knocked into kitchen cabinets and shit. Like, this is real life. It's crazy. Now when I think about it, and I think about the gym that I have now and the blessings that I have to train where I train on mats, blows my mind that we trained in this. But it also, like, solidifies in me how passionate I was about the sport. You know, how passionate I was about martial arts. So there was this slow process of finding people that were willing to do this kind of training, and then they would train for a while, and then they would quit, and they'd train for a while, and then they'd quit. And I just kept going. I kept going until I was working at McLeod, and then I got enough money, my first good job, to buy $1,800 worth of mats, and I threw them in my basement, and then I found a group of 4 to 5 guys that would train with me consistently. And then one day, one of them said, I want to fight. I want to fight for real. Up to that point, I had just trained people and grappled. Devin Christian.
Devin
Debo.
was the first one, huh?
Yep, Debo was the first guy. Now, this isn't the first guy I trained with that fought.
No.
There were a lot of people that were seeking me out because at this point, you know, we're talking like 98, 99, I'd already been training or studying martial arts for 5 years. So I had a good chunk of experience and knowledge. So there were people like Dave Scherzer, who I'd met. It was like, hey, I saw you working those leg locks. I'd like to get in on that, and I'd like you to cross train with you and stuff. But Devin was the first guy that trained with me that was like in it for 6 months consistent and said, I want to fight. And so he was, you know, before I knew it, he was in a car with Bo Lawfridge on his way to Des Moines to fight Ronnie Britt,
No
the
kidding.
War Frog. And I was like, hey, not a good idea. And he got his ass kicked, but he came back, he loved it. And
You know, I got my ass kicked by Ronnie Britt too, right?
I did.
Yeah.
No, I don't remember. But
That's funny.
Yeah, I still kind of keep up with Ronnie Britt.
God, what a good guy.
Yeah,
huh?
he was a great guy. Yeah.
He beat the shit out of me before submitting me, and then we did shots of Crown Peach in the back while he explained in intricate detail how not to get taken down by the takedown he had used on me. What a fucking guy, huh?
He's traveling the country now in an RV with his wife and having a great
No
fucking time.
shit.
Yep. Yeah, good dude.
Yeah.
So that's a very abbreviated story of how I got involved in martial arts and in humble beginnings, for sure.
I mean, so we're only up to like 2000, right?
Dude, so at that point in time, martial arts was kind of in a blackout because, you know, John McCain called it human cockfighting. And it went dark in public pay-per-view. You could only watch it on like Dish Network and kind of obscure methods of seeing it. And so the Underground Forum, which you know, at the time was like 14 to 15,000 people nationwide. And they were holding the sport together by the threads. They were traveling, you know, the first show that I went to.
Because you couldn't advertise a fight. Like, nobody knew where fights were, right? So you get on the underground and people would be like, hey, there's fighting.
Yeah, there wasn't money. There wasn't any money in the sport. It was unregulated. There was no commission involvement, which I kind of miss those days for certain reasons. But yeah, there wasn't enough money and there wasn't enough interest in that point in time to advertise once it went off pay-per-view. And so you had to go to the underground to find out where these fights were. And they had state forums and they had, you know, all of this information for people. But there were people that were traveling 3 to 4 hours to fight for free in like barns, you know. And you remember some of that stuff. Well, the first show that me and Kurt went to was in like an armory in some small town in Iowa, probably 30, 40 minutes away from Blairstown. I don't even remember what the town was. But we got there, and there was this group of like organic mixed martial artists, which at the time, mixed martial arts hadn't been coined as a term yet. It was cage fighting or UFC fighting or ultimate fighting. These guys had laid out folding tables, folding wood tables, not raised tables, but like just collapsed, put them on a concrete floor, and then put military grade tarps and tents over them and fought on that shit. And there was this, I remember the main event was this guy, Clayton Miller, who was a full grown man. And then he went up against this 16-year-old, 17-year-old kid that was actually pretty good, pretty talented, but didn't have the experience that Clayton had. Clayton got on top of him and started elbowing him in the head, and his head was on that table, on the concrete. So you could hear the echo of an elbow and a skull just resonate through this building. And I was like, is somebody gonna get killed doing this? Like, this is a 16, 17-year-old kid. Like, there's no regulations about what's going on here. And that was when I was like, you gotta be out of your fucking mind to do this shit, especially for free. And again, I had never competed a day in my life up to this point. So like, the idea that people would do this for fun was wild to me. Martial arts was awesome. You know, for me to be able to defend myself against an aggressor, that's a great thing. But to do this stuff for fun without pay seemed like insanity to me. But there were people that wanted me to help them prepare, get ready for these events, and they were doing pretty good. You know, so when they would go out and win, I'd be like, damn, like maybe I'm onto something here. Maybe I'm pretty good. And at the end of the day, I was ahead of the game. You know, I knew that mixed martial arts was a thing before mixed martial arts was a thing. And so I just kind of doubled down on my efforts, and then, you know, the rest after that is history. Once we started competing, I got guys that went from training in our basement, and they used to call me the basement top team back in the day on the underground. Like, they were insulting me because at the time, people don't know, Brazilian top team was a very prominent upcoming mixed martial arts team. And that just inspired me. I remember, because I used to be on the underground all the time. You know, that was the hub. It was when somebody called me basement top team that I logged off, and I really never got on there. I got on there a couple more times after that, but I had like thousands of posts. And when somebody said that, it was another fork where I was like, I'll show you then. You know what I mean? If you don't believe in me, if you're gonna try to cut me down, I'm going to write a story that you're gonna have to believe.
There was also an event, which interestingly enough was fantastic for mixed martial arts and ruined things like the underground. And that would be a little TV show
Called The Ultimate Fighter? Yeah, and we knew, and I knew. I think everybody that was in the martial arts community, the mixed martial arts community, very grassroots, very like underground. You know?
Literally, yeah.
There was something about that I really liked. I really felt like I'm a part of something special. I'm a part of a group of people that are very passionate about something, and I knew that mixed martial arts was great. I knew that it was going to blow up someday, or at least I had hope that it would, because I thought, like, this is the ultimate combat sport. I had grown up watching boxing from a very young age, and you know as well as I know that the heavyweight boxing champion of the world was the baddest man on the planet. At that time, it was Mike Tyson in the 80s.
Who is potentially still the baddest man? I mean,
well, he'll bite you. You know, if he ain't biting you, he's biting his gloves. But what a great story to see Mike redeemed to a certain degree, and like, he was down in the dumps financially, and he's built a great empire for himself. But the point was, the best boxer. You know, and then even before that, there were some people that kind of delusionally believed that these heroes that they saw in pro wrestling were the baddest guys on the planet. None of it based in reality. Well, I knew that wasn't true. I knew that there was some humble, terrifying monster out there, or monsters out there, that could demolish the best boxers in seconds. I didn't know how, whether it be kicks, whether it be you know, ground, whether it be a combination, but I knew that there was something out there, and I wanted to see it. And so I knew that the UFC would take off, and there was almost this melancholy in me, because I knew once it did, the trolls would show up.
and it would be less of, and not completely, because I feel like anything that centers around a specific interest, and certainly an interest like violence, is almost by definition a subculture,
Yeah.
but it wouldn't be the subculture like the dark.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, the gritty.
The numbers would increase to a point.
Yeah, there was a gritty, small, like there was an honesty and a truth when you showed up to a fight show in 1998, and you knew that the only people that were going to be there were going to be people that were about it, people that were going to fight human beings in a cage or a ring for no money, with no oversight, just because they love to do it. That's a pretty interesting dynamic to be a part of.
Yeah, that's a different person.
Yeah. Yeah,
It's funny because the level of athlete and competition and skill is, grown exponentially.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't say everybody involved at this point is that kind of person,
not.
because that is a certain person.
You're absolutely right. Like now you have a lot of athletes that can fight. But back then you had like truly, I would say, martial arts minded individuals. They weren't doing it for money. They weren't doing it for fame. They weren't doing it because they wanted to emulate a guy like Conor McGregor. They were doing it because they were looking for something, or they were trying to exercise some demon, and they found some commonality there. There wasn't the douchebaggery that you deal with now, because if there was, that shit would be sorted out within an event and you would never return again, because you'd get your fucking teeth knocked out, you'd get your jaw broken, you'd get your orbital broken, The fact that there weren't deaths back then is kind of shocking to me. But, to your point, The Ultimate Fighter, I remember seeing The Ultimate Fighter show and going, this is a double-edged sword here. Because now I get to see this on TV, on Spike TV. This is really cool. But if this really catches fire, that it'll be the end of the underground. It'll be the end of, not the end of the underground literally, but figuratively the end of this sport being an underground sport, and this kind of like awesome culture that I'm a part of, this pure culture. And it was. I remember seeing the Forrest Griffin, Stephan Bonner fight and going, kind of thinking to myself and telling other people, this is everything we wanted and nothing that I want. Because it's such a great fight. It's gonna catapult this. People were calling each other on the phone going, look at this fight, this is fucking crazy. And I knew the nerds, I knew that the trolls online were gonna show up, and the sport was gonna be flooded with fans, it was gonna be flooded with money, and that ultimately was gonna potentially turn it into some of the ills that boxing had to deal with.
And talk about what an amazing, talk about a confluence of events, right? You and I have probably seen tens of thousands of MMA fights.
Yeah.
Right? I bet half of them were not great. I bet 3/4 of them were not great. I bet a reasonable percentage were fucking horrible. You know what I mean? I bet, we've seen two guys hug for 3 rounds. We've seen one guy lay in another. And then we got that fight.
Yeah,
and
the finale too.
And not only was it fantastic, it was Stand and Wang.
Yep.
It was something that, had, even if it had been a high-level jiu-jitsu match, we would have loved it. But the average person, who'd stand them up, quit hugging each other. Hey, you know what? I kind of I didn't grapple a day in my life till I met you. I was 32. Yeah, been a minute. And I remember watching mixed martial arts before I started grappling, and I had no idea what was happening, and I was that guy. Not that I wasn't the stand-em-up guy, but I had no idea what I was looking at.
Yeah.
And it could have been a super high-level fight, and the majority of the country that tuned in to see it would have had no idea.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a commentary on culture too.
Yes.
Because in the Western culture, in America, it is fisticuffs. There's glory in blood. There's glory in, throwing fists and bones and knocking people out, and it's exciting. That exists in Eastern culture too. But Eastern culture, like in Japan, for example, with Pride, they're just as excited about grappling because they know what they're looking at.
Yeah, you get...
Yeah. Oh, there's
very Japanese crowd.
But. Yeah, there was I think it was Carlos Newton fought Sakuraba.
Oh, yes.
Remember that?
And they kind of sort of agreed not to, an unspoken agreement not to strike.
But the grappling exchanges were incredible, and they were when the fans that were educated knew what they were watching, they were like, wow, that's awesome. And same thing with the Japanese fans. But in America, they might just be like, oh, stand them up, you know what I mean? So I can understand why it comes down to just a lack of education and understanding. It comes down to a culture that really has not been educated on ground techniques, and I was a testament to that, because Even though I looked at Bruce's
Yeah.
books and he
Yep.
had the guillotine in it and he had the armbar in it, I kind of went over that and went, oh yeah, that's just him studying different martial arts. Like, there's no way that anybody could effectively control people on the ground. Like, I was part of that delusion because of the mystique of striking arts that I had bought into. It was only when I saw the UFC the first time when I was like, wow, I have to give some serious thought and attention to Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and not just Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, grappling in general. Because one of the other kind of dualities of watching that was knowing that with the rise of popularity in mixed martial arts, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, this kind of unknown outside, at least in our region, but generally globally unknown, was going to explode at some point. And when it exploded, it was going to turn into the same thing that other martial arts had. It was going to become watered down. It was going to become interpreted by other people in different ways. And while I'll say that I still believe Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu in the modern era to be one of the truest black belts that you'll ever have to earn because of what you have to go through, it has become popularized. It has been injected with a lot of money and become a sport, an awesome sport, honestly, that I'm glad to see flourish. But now you're starting to see a separation. I would argue quite a while ago, you're starting to see a separation between practical, real combat Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu
I agree with
and
you
sport
100%.
Jiu-Jitsu. A good example of that would be like a seated guard position. In sport Jiu-Jitsu, you'll have people that will sit to guard sometimes, and they'll sit there like this, like waiting for you to engage them so they can get under your legs and they can enter the legs, or they can, and like in combat you'd get kicked in the mouth. You know, so the thing that worried me and does worry me, and I knew was coming, was with the injection of money and attention, this is going to get watered down over time. It's going to lose its attachment to actual combat, and to a degree it kind of has, you know.
I agree with you wholeheartedly. I will go back to the fact that you spar live. One of the nice things, and I think it is a reason why you can spar live, is you're not taking head trauma. Like,
Right.
I don't want to box, not that, funny because we did, but I don't want to strike every single day.
Yeah.
You know, and you can't and you shouldn't.
Yeah, you want to tear the shit out of the rest of your body.
Excuse me.
But the reality, though, what you're speaking on, that you have to spar, that you have to work against a real live opponent,
Yep.
is why it's still the most credible
Yep.
form of
And
individual self-defense, I think.
I would argue that karate, and I don't know the timelines, I'm making this up, but I bet, you know, karate came to this country and then was quickly watered down because you could teach something and you could make money and people wanted it and they kind of believed the hype. And again, without real hard sparring, there's no way to tell.
Well, and there's, and this is unfounded, so don't quote me on this, and hopefully the internet doesn't crucify me for this, but what I've heard was a lot of karate that came over to the States came over like World War II, post-World War II.
Okay.
And a lot of the masters of karate watered it down intentionally, so that when GIs came back, or people came back to the States with it, they didn't have like the truest version because it was guarded. They wanted to keep it as like a social custom. So a lot of the martial arts that came here weren't like the highest form expression schools. They were kind of watered down. I don't know if there's truth to that, but it makes sense. You know, if you think about a post-World War II Japan, probably a little residual,
Probably a little mad.
little
all I'm
upset over
saying.
the old nuclear bombings that took place. But that definitely could be the case. But even if that wasn't the case, and you had people coming back with really good karate, what happens in an environment where you're unchecked competitively is you start making assumptions. In peacetime, when you don't have to show your skills, you start interpreting things your own way and going, you know what? This is the way this happens, but I'm gonna actually tweak it a little bit because I think this is a better way to do it. That's fine, as long as you've actually engaged in combat and proven it. But a lot of these people didn't. They existed in martial arts gyms for 20 or 30 years. They never had to fight a single soul, and they just made up a bunch of shit to sell it as a product to people that were none the wiser.
I would also argue, and I think you can attest to this, if you're looking to monetize something,
Yep.
you have to cast your net as wide as possible. And I mean, a fine example, we had, 25 or 30 people at Valhalla back in the day who couldn't pay dues. They were $30 a month, by the way. I'm just saying.
30.
And
some of them told them that they shouldn't have to pay any because of who they are.
Yes. My point, though, is we had a pretty core group, and we kept that pretty core group, and regularly we got newcomers who were like, I don't want to, kind of back to your earlier point about like it's a certain type of person that does a certain type of thing.
Yeah.
And I do think with karate, even if they had come back with the hardcorest version, your average soccer mom and her kids is not going to do it.
Yeah, it's gonna get weakened. Because it has to almost if you want to allow the masses to have access to it. I also heard something too, and I'm not gonna fact check it, but I also was told that there was no belts back in the day. That there was just a uniform, and your black belt wasn't actually a black belt. It was varying shades of dirty.
Yeah.
You kept your belt as a tradition.
Yep.
And the dirtier it got, the more respect you had earned essentially for putting your time in.
Yeah, I've heard that as well.
Belt.
Yep.
And that what really drove the colored belt system was the monetization of martial arts schools and going, oh, congratulations, you got your yellow belt. Because if you had to tell somebody, hey, this is basically like, it's not a religion, but it's like a religious practice, and you're going to have to do this for 10 to 15 years.
Yep. And there is no real destination, it's just a journey. People are very goal-orientated.
Right,
oriented.
And if I can't see a clearly defined goal, like we know that the goals will be found. We know that the fulfillment will be found just through the work and through ultimately through suffering. Through the enduring of suffering and the overcoming of suffering, you build great character attributes from it. But to market that, to go, hey, you want to come suffer for 10 years and get some respect? Most people are like, no.
Yeah, you'll have 8 Buddhist monks lined up.
Yeah.
Like, hey, I'm in.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
Yeah.
And what that led to was in the late 80s, early 90s, a few, again, there's always the top 5% that are on a different level.
Yep.
But the other majority that were, 38-year-old overweight guy running around with a black belt demanding respect in a Taekwondo dojo when he literally can't kick above his waist.
So how many times have you been told by somebody like, oh, you have a black belt? My 12-year-old niece has a black belt in Taekwondo.
Yep.
I always say the same thing. I would kick your niece's ass. All right.
Bring her here.
Right. Oh, she's a black belt? Huh? Yeah. And
I'm wearing a black belt right now. It's leather.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean shit. You can buy a black belt on Amazon for $10 and pretend that you're anything. And people do that. People actually do that. They go, oh, I'm a black belt, and I earned it because I know I did. That's the one beautiful thing about Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is you're going to have to earn it to some degree. But, even if you listen to some coaches like John Danaher has been quoted as saying, I've met black belts that absolutely suck. And that wasn't the case 15 or 20 years ago. When the UFC came out and Hoist was a black belt, if you found a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu that was right off the boat or even in the States and was taught by somebody off the boat, they're a bad motherfucker.
Yep.
Through and through. They know self-defense, they know how to fight, they know how to sport, they know it all. There have been times where I've went to seminars and seen black belts training and they didn't know basic things. Like really basic things, like a dorsal kimura.
Come on.
No. I'm dead serious. Like to the point where I was like, why are they doing that? Are they trying to test something or whatever? And it was, they just didn't, I just sat and watched them. They just didn't know. Like black belts training together, 2 black belts training together at the school. And they were being taught very, very high level instruction for a dorsal kimura. And they were doing it with their legs spread like wide open. So you could move your head. No, I'm dead serious. And I was just, that was like an epiphanal moment where I was like, this doesn't really mean as much as it used to because it's been watered down. There hasn't been as high of an expectation. You get that a lot now with jiu-jitsu gyms, and even it's not limited to jiu-jitsu, but where if you show up, they mark your attendance on a card, and once you get so many attendance marks, you get a stripe. Doesn't matter how good you are. It's like you show up, that's it. So you know that we've been in gyms before, and there's different varying degrees of work that people put in. Some put in a lot, some put in only as much as they need to put in. Some pay attention in class, some don't even come to class. So what you have now is quite a few jiu-jitsu gyms that are monetizing the growth of and capitalizing from the growth of jiu-jitsu and going, oh, you're here for 10 classes, stripe. That's it. There's no expectation. There's no test process.
That's real?
Oh, it's very real. It's very spread. It happens in a lot of schools, like way more than I think that you would think. That you are accredited if you come to class, and then once you hit a predetermined number of classes, as long as you're not out like killing babies or something, you're going to get a stripe. And I've been in class, I've taught classes before where I have 90%, 95% of the people, overwhelming majority of people like this. Okay. Maybe some of them taking notes. And then this guy. And in that school, they're all the same. And that's weak. You know, I feel like people have to show more than that. It doesn't mean they have to compete. It doesn't mean that they have to beat me. It just means that they have to like show me competence. And I feel like the highest levels of any art form are going to demand that. And the more an art form gains popularity, whether it be martial or otherwise, the more people are going to go. The more instructors or the people that are expected to withhold a certain standards are going to look past that for.
See, and I would argue the more that happens, the more important it is to guard it.
Yeah.
To do it. And I'm assuming, I don't want to speak for you, but you promote the way I do. By the way, I'm not a black belt. You know, some people, it's different for everybody. Some people it is like attendance, and I don't mean just making a check, but it's, you know, that obviously
that
is part of.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know, and some people it's mat performance. For the 19-year-old kid, I'll probably factor in mat performance a little bit more than I will for the 55-year-old guy that has 3 kids and can only train.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, you know, I don't think it's good to have a very super strict, you know, checklist for promotion. But I do think, you know, that you can promote somebody that isn't great. I don't need that 55-year-old to go out and win gold at tournaments with regularity.
Right.
But I do need him to be able to explain how to do a dorsal fucking Kimura.
You're absolutely right. It's like, you know, there's going to be those people out there that they don't give you any choice. They're good. They conduct themselves professionally. They're thoughtful, they're humble, they work hard, and
they help other people.
Yeah, and they smoke everybody they compete against. They compete regularly. If you compete regularly as, like, let's say a white belt, and you trounce everybody, at a certain point I almost owe it to the sport to rank you up, because if I don't, you're sandbagging. You're beating a bunch of people that need fair competition. You have proven that you are not here anymore. Now, if you've done that and you're a piece of shit, I'll hold you back. And I might further say that you're not allowed to compete until you make whatever changes. And I don't really have to do that. Usually the art and the sport sorts it out through training.
Yeah.
But then to your point, there's somebody who maybe is limited with body restrictions. They may have a hip replacement, or they might have this or that, and they can't physically go compete. But they can show their passion in other ways. But ultimately, you know, if you go out and compete, I feel like that's an easy way, because if you're competing and consistently you're showing yourself above, competency is proven. But if you're not competing, but you can teach your ass off, if you're not competing, but you can convey to a white belt how to do a dorsal Kimura and have him lock in the major attributes of that within one, well, that's something I'm going to take very seriously. So it's ultimately proving competency and character is usually the biggest things that when it comes to me ranking somebody up. I need to know that you know how to do it. You don't have to be the best at teaching it, because teaching is its own art unto itself. But you have to know how to do it, and you have to represent the values that I think come with what should be expected of a martial artist. And a lot of that is humility. You have to be willing, you have to be capable of killing, and want that to be your absolute last resort if it ever came down to it. You have to be a good human being, you know, because who wants to teach bone breaking and strangulation to pieces of shit human beings? You know, there have been some people I've had to kick out of the gym. There have been some kids that I've had to threaten to kick out of the gym because they've used this, you know, to show their dominance. And that all relates to some trauma that they have or some insecurity that I can kind of identify with. But at the end of the day, it's too dangerous. So that's what I really try to rank up on is what is your competency level and what is your character. And, you know, luckily martial arts, if you're doing it right, if you're training hard, develops incredibly strong character.
Yeah, this endeavor brings to it, or produces through it, some pretty good people.
Yeah.
I've met people, you know, regularly who've been like, you know, I know a couple fighters, and they're surprisingly, they think it's surprising.
Nice.
That, yeah, you know, pretty good bunch of guys. You know, I find we don't have a ton of ego in that respect. You know, because
Well, yeah.
you know what I've had happen? I've had my ass kicked.
Yeah. If you're in martial arts, you've had your ass kicked. If you're doing, again, if you're doing it correctly, if you're seeking out opportunities to better yourself, you don't want to be the best guy in the gym. You know what I mean? And that's something that I had to deal with because I was ahead of the curve. So when I started training with people, I was way ahead of them already. And they were playing catch up all the time. So I had to really take teaching seriously because I was either going to compete and get beat up, or I was going to train killers that were going to give me competition in the gym every single day. Well, I did a little bit of both. And to that point, the interesting thing about, you know, people that train like this and they go through this process of like suffering and rebuilding and suffering and rebuilding, they should be the people, in my opinion. They're the ones that have the character because they've put themselves into the fire and they've come out stronger to lead the world. And they're the least likely to. You know, there's this weird duality in it where the lessons I feel like of going through this process and getting your ass kicked and rebuilding and getting your ass kicked would make an incredible human being to lead the people, a selfless person. And I've even thought about, we've had this conversation before about representing people on a political level. And I've been at war with myself for 20 years, going, who the fuck do you think you are? Why should you lead anybody? You know what I mean? And then I look at Washington, you know what I mean? I look at the people that are leading us and I'm like, they've never, most, I don't want to say most, I don't want to generalize, but so many of the people that have been sitting in Congress or the House for 30, 40 fucking years never went through the shit you and I went through.
No.
They never suffered. They never went through, they never brought themselves out of poverty. They never had to go into an MMA gym and get the shit kicked out of them every single day and learn those lessons. They never had to do it. They're going in there with almost this sense of ego, and then the ego that's dissolved to a certain degree because of the type of training that we do makes us more likely to go, oh, we shouldn't be doing that. But now I'm like at a point in my life where I'm like, well, who else is there? Like this process crafts character, humility, confidence, selflessness in some degrees that I think that the world needs. And to relegate that to just a martial arts gym is somewhat limiting in its own self. You know, like the qualities of being a good martial arts transcend just the gym and are very human. You know, it's very much like the military in that way.
It's funny, I can't, what were you saying?
Well, my hope is that people, you know, that would otherwise be outraged about everything here and there realize that with a strong economy, with people, with the kind of prosperity that Americans should have. If you think about all those trillions and trillions of dollars over decades for war and for pharma and for all the shit that was squandered, if you take all that money and you put it back into American people, we don't know what we have right now. We know that we have presently the greatest country in terms of opportunity on the planet. But that has also been the greatest country that's had trillions of dollars of economic opportunity squandered. So what happens if we turn back the clocks? What happens if I jump in, you know, Doc Brown's DeLorean, hit 88 and go back and completely disassemble the Federal Reserve Act, and all of those trillions of dollars, all of that tax money is put back into the hands of Americans? I would argue the present reality we have is closer to the flying car, is closer to what the American dream was supposed to be for minorities, for women, for everybody. I think we would be probably, I mean, if you think about trillions of dollars of defense, I think we're colonizing other planets already. And people be like, oh, that sounds crazy. We're almost there. And we've had to struggle through oppression. Yes, we're the freest country in the world, and we are still slaves in some way. I would argue economically, anytime you put your hands or your money in the hands of people that can print as much of it as they want, you're not really free. You're working under a system that somebody else controls, and these people that control it, they're not politicians. They're not even public figures. You know, people like The Rock.
Certainly not elected.
Yeah, no, they're people that hide behind the scenes, people that have huge amounts of money, and they don't want to be seen, because if they're seen, they'll be found out. I feel like people were starting to wake up 10 years ago, and then the woke label got attributed to so many other progressive values that don't really represent everybody. But my hope is that we're coming upon a great awakening where people are starting to see through the bullshit and educate themselves, and in doing so, truly show how much love they have for country and for humanity. Because it's real easy to talk shit, but to do something about it, to change who you vote for, to demand answers from bureaucrats, that's a different thing altogether. So.
I couldn't agree more. Like I said, I'm excited for this, for Trump's presidency. One thing I want to go back to, January 6th, not a whole lot of countries get overthrown by people dressed for Halloween. It's just the one point I want to make.
Right.
And listen, so I'm often frustrated by the extremes of everything, the extremes of how things are perceived and have to be framed. January 6th is the worst thing since 9/11.
It's insulting.
Like
dishonorable.
It's insulting. It's denigrating. It's How about January 6th was bad? It was a dark time in our country. It was something that should not have happened. It was a poor demonstration of what the conservative movement should want to portray.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not worse than fucking Pearl Harbor. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, I think that, people's ability to let several things exist at once just ain't there. You know, and it's because of how we're, wherever my phone is, we're inundated constantly with, the extreme view on something.
Absolutes, yeah. You either are or you're not. Yeah.
Yep. And it's funny because the whole woke thing made me think of that. I, like you, am a man without a party. Because I'm pro 2A and I support gay marriage.
100%.
What? I hope nobody's brain exploded.
And you know what? I'll go further. I'm rabidly Second Amendment advocate. I'm rabidly pro-gay marriage, pro-gay rights. Right. Always have been.
Yep.
I think socialism in general can become a very dangerous thing. I think any ism can become a very dangerous thing.
Extreme.
But I also believe that we can defend individual liberty and we can defend Second Amendment rights, and we can also have socialized health care. I know this because I went to Norway recently and was just kind of like in awe of the culture there. There were things about America I missed. And there were things that, like, Norway is the place where my descendants were from, so it was this amazing journey through this place that I do feel some strange connection to, but I still want to live in America. I'm still proud to be an American. I'm still proud to have the opportunities that we have here in America, because in Norway, even though they aren't like a fascist state, there are things that they don't have that we do have that I like, that I enjoy. But one thing that I believe, because I care about my fellow man and I care about humanity, that if we're in 2025, people shouldn't suffer and die from diseases without some kind of help. If we can spend trillions of dollars on war, we can spend trillions of dollars on health. And if we spend trillions of dollars on trying to make people healthy, we probably don't even need to spend trillions of dollars of treating people with things like cancer. If there's any socialism I support, it would be healthcare. And again, if you go back and you make sound money, I don't think you even need to. I think people are so fucking wealthy that they can look out for and will look out for their fellow man, because people are inherently good. If they weren't, we wouldn't have civilized societies. We just wouldn't. It would be complete chaos. But when you take civilized societies and you strip them of opportunity and you make it hard to survive, and you engineer banking depression so that our grandparents are stuffing their fucking money in mattresses for the next 20 years, they're going to be less likely to help their fellow man because they can't, because they have to save their families.
Yeah, hierarchy of needs, sorry.
Yeah, so people live in the middle. People should live and be proud to be moderate and to go, let's not be liberals, let's not be conservatives. Let's study liberalism, the benefits, the pitfalls. Let's study conservatism, the benefits, the pitfalls, and let's find a happy medium. That used to be labeled something called common sense. And when, you could almost see the turn of that. And it was about 2010, I feel like, during the Obama administration, when people just kind of lost touch with that. And they thought they were in some great existential, ideological war, and that they needed to pick one side or the other. It was far left or far right. And I'm like, we should be sitting down at a round table. We shouldn't be fortifying our side to go to battle with the other side, because we're all on the same side. And if we're divided, this is a statement as old as time. This is Caesar, I believe. Divide and conquer. How can we know this? How can we know this knowledge that if you divide a people, you can conquer them, and then willfully allow ourselves to be divided? That's what's happened. So I feel a hope that that's happening less, but we just have to be reasonable. Like it was around that time that you heard the woke term born, and for about 10 minutes, relatively, like I'm just using this figuratively, that was a positive thing.
Yeah.
If you were woke,
awake.
correct.
Yeah.
It was obviously a short term for awakened. And now when you say woke, it is nothing but hindered by negative connotations of like all of these different progressive values and stuff like that. So hopefully we don't see a woke thing as it's defined now. Hopefully we see like a true like global awakening where people are just done with it. I saw a video on Twitter the other day of a Russian and a Ukrainian fighter fighting to the death with a knife.
Wow.
Yeah, and it was exactly what you'd expect. It was brutal. It was biting fingers. It was clawing, tearing, and this soldier, I think it was a Russian soldier or somebody working with the Russians, stabbed him right in the chest, and they had it was a helmet cam. So it was like first person. Wow. It was incredibly intense. And after there was a fatal or a mortal wound delivered, he said, "Hey, you're a great fighter. You're the best fighter in the world on this day. Let me die quietly." And they both sat there with each other. And he's like, "You did really well. You fought really well." And he's bleeding out of his face. The victor is bleeding out of his face. And he's like, "Mom, I'm coming home." And it was horrible and beautiful at the same time. And I thought about the quote that war brings out the best and the worst in us. And I thought, here are these two peasants showing mutual respect and admiration, facing death for each other. And what are their handlers doing right now? Nothing. What are their handlers going to do for the sacrifice that they feel is for freedom or liberty or whatever they're fighting for? They're going to maybe give them a medal and forget about them the next day. Like, I hope that the world can wake up and realize that on a global level, if you zoom out, we're just primates in imaginary pens on a rock, the pale blue dot out in space. Like, the suffering that the world has endured through these genocides and through all of this shit over the last however many millennia has to be for something. It has to be for something. So there's people out there that think, why would I care about anybody? Nobody cares about anything else. I'm like, well, I think about that soldier. I think about the soldiers. I think about American soldiers. I think about people that have suffered horrible, horrible deaths for just causes. And how dishonorable it would be to them to just give up and to just stop trying to make the world a better place, And so that's why I wear green. A lot of people ask me why I wear predominantly all olive drab. And this is a little bit off topic, but I've always wanted to talk about this because I never really do. When I was 7, I watched Platoon. And up to that point, I had been inundated by my school education with America's the best. We're all freedom and justice, blah, 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 like so admirable. And then I watched Platoon and I was like, oh my God, we've done horrible, horrible things to people. And that doesn't mean America's bad. It doesn't mean the things that founded America, the ideas that founded America are bad, but we've done some horrible people, and we've had horrible things done to our people in wars that we shouldn't have fought. My whole idea of patriotism was kind of flipped on its head when I watched that movie. And the olive drab, was the color of the GIs in Vietnam. And so I was always fascinated with the discipline and the honor that required being in the military. And And then the more I grew and the more that I educated myself about the sacrifice of American soldiers and the sacrifice of American vets that don't die but lead pretty rough, horrible existences, and I like green, for what it's worth. I also like green. I like earthy colors, you know, those three reasons. Whenever I put on something that's olive drab, I think about our troops, I think about the troops. And I want to honor them. And so we've actually set up a nonprofit, me and another veteran in Courtney, and we're trying to give veterans training. It's called Valor Recovery. We're trying to give veterans training. We're trying to give help with life services like moving, homeless veterans moving.
What's it called again?
Valor Recovery. And it's like a three-headed spear type of thing. Want to give them training, want to give them counseling, one-on-one and group session. This is happening at the gym. And we want to gather together people and resources to help some of these homeless veterans move so they don't lose their belongings and things like that. But yeah, just like, I know I kind of went off on a tangent there, but like I think January 6th is a collection of ugly feelings and ugly actions and misrepresentations, but we have millions and millions of veterans out there that have died, that have served and still live, that have been maimed, and those are people that I think about every single day. And if there's ever any kind of revolt, if there's ever any kind of breaking point where shit hits the fan and people go, fuck that, fuck you, we're taking over, you guys are going to trial, it'll be them. It'll be disgruntled veterans that have been told they're fighting for freedom, only to find out they're fighting for wealth.
I was just going to say.
Money.
Yeah.
Yeah, blood money. So, and I don't think that makes their sacrifice less honorable. I think that, you know, a lot of people that serve, there are people that serve, and this is going to be controversial, kind of shitty people, right? They're serving because they want money. They're serving because they got no other choice. Sure. But the discipline of the military forges some kind of character, most times. But there are a lot of people that join the military, particularly after 9/11, that thought that they were serving a great purpose to defend liberty. And so when you take somebody that's been told that and brainwashed that, and you send them to Iraq and they're killing kids, and they're putting 50 caliber into a van of a family that's panicked and trying to get away, of course they're going to be fucked up. Of course 22 of them, or a veteran's going to kill themselves every 22 seconds. And then when they get out, and they come back home and they go from a total shithole war zone to a grocery store where they can pick whatever food they want, have whatever they want, they kind of go, was I fighting for freedom? I get it. It's fucked up. It's dishonorable that those veterans go to the VA and they have to fight tooth and nail to get coverage. It's so fucking disgusting. It's disgusting. Yeah. It's disgusting that we even have to have a conversation where private citizens have to form nonprofits to help our veterans. But I do believe there will be a tipping point in humanity and people along with those veterans where we'll see change, and hopefully that's a period of time we're coming, because I got kids. I want the world to be a better place. There is still a part of my inner child that entertains the utopian delusion that there will be peace on earth someday, and that the only reason we haven't had it is because nobody believes it's possible. Well, nothing's possible until a majority believes it is, and then it always happens. You know, it wasn't possible to have running water. It wasn't possible to have electricity until it was, until the people decided that it was time, and that was innovated. So, you know, hope is what I have for the future, and it's been a long time, so it's nice to feel that. It wasn't on my bingo card that Donald Trump would have something to do with that.
Telling you.
But we are where we are.
Yeah.
So.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you for having me. It's an honor to be here. Not for nothing.
Hey, not for nothing. Good to see you. Yeah, I mean, obviously, we're going to schedule another session.
Yeah, I'm down for sure.
I bet we didn't touch on half of what.
Oh, dude, we never will. But that's the point. It's fun.
Yeah, I like talking to you.
I think that this, you know, I think we've talked about this, but podcasting. Who would have thought podcasting would matter?
Who would have thought, simply because, like, you know, for the last 30 years, whatever it is, the model is going the other way. You know, with your phone, the videos get shorter, the attention span shrinks. Mm-hmm. Somehow, though, this really is a really great medium. You know, I myself listen to, you know, 3-hour podcasts regularly. You know, and sometimes it takes me, you know, 2 days to get through it, because, you know, I got work and I get training and whatever, but Yeah, it's an incredibly. It's a. I mean, not for nothing from how you and I grew up. This was not a thing.
I have a theory on it.
Go.
Here's my theory. Humans crave human interaction. They depend on it. If they don't have it, they go insane. In the last 20, 30 years, we've been stripped of it because of social media, because of internet. We have been deprived of an inherently necessary social thing, which is long-form conversation so that we can figure things out and problem solve bigger issues. We've been robbed of that, unconsciously and potentially consciously.
Oh, purposefully.
Yeah, and so
but,
when I started doing a podcast, I had to battle with myself and my ego. Why would anybody want to hear me? Because nobody hears anybody, that's why. Because they crave it. Because what we used to have at the dinner table, what we used to have walking down the street with our brothers and our sisters, we don't have it anymore. We sit inside, we scroll social media, and we're depressed at an alarming rate. And so when you see two people sit down and have conversations and have epiphanies and go, wow, oh yeah, I didn't think about that. It resonates with the human soul, if there is such a thing, or the heart or the mind. And it makes people go, yeah, this is what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to sit down and talk. Short little Vine videos and stuff are fun, but that's not the most fulfilling part of life. Human connection and human interaction is, and that's why I think podcasting has exploded, because people need it. They crave it. They'll even sit back vicariously through other people and watch them and go, wow, that was a really insightful conversation. No, it was just a conversation. It was a conversation that went on 3 hours, and people used to do this, and it's awesome. You know, so now you're doing it through other people, but that's the way we reach people now. We sit down and we have a talk like we would have 20 or 30 years ago. We just didn't record it then. Now we do. So that's my theory, is the absence or the depletion of human interaction. People are fascinated by and inspired.
Human interaction.
Yeah, they're inspired by seeing people think and use deductive, reasoning and logic to work through problems and to talk about subjects. And I think that's why podcasting has blown up. It's kind of made people reminded people that we need this. That if we want to step forward and solve problems, it's not going to be by doing a 166 character tweet. It's sitting down and talking and looking at a human being and going, you know what? We don't disagree on everything. In fact, some things we vehemently disagree, but we do agree on like 95%. Even if you brought in a hardcore proud liberal in here, if we talked about life, most people want to raise their family or have prosperity for themselves, and that's it.
Yeah,
that's it.
I don't think any of that's controversial, to your point.
No, not at all. And we love controversy. We love to sit back and go and eat our popcorn. But I really believe that this is the abyss.
Boy, you ain't wrong.
I think when you stare into this stares back into you, and that's how we've got here. And podcasting is a release of that to remind people are good. People inherently are good. They do shitty things in their lives, they make mistakes, but generally, throughout the whole spectrum, they're good. Because if they weren't, we would not be here. We wouldn't exist.
Well said.
Thank you, brother. Love you.
Yep. Love you too, man. I'll talk to
Awesome.
you soon.
Episode 1.
Yeah,
Boom.
Yeah. Not for nothing.